Good evening to everybody, and welcome to a Friday edition of uh, God's God's answers to your questions. I'll get this thing right one of these days. We're filling in for CJ tonight. He is off, and so we're going to try to pick it up. And here to help me tonight is Mr. Randy Sturgis. How you doing, Randy?
Glad to see all of you.
Good, fantastic, fantastic. You having a good day, Randy?
Yes. Are you too?
Really? Had a good day at work. Everything was just going really fine. Just kind of a calm, peaceful day. Nice, warm weather. Everything's just really fantastic out. So, okay, what I'd like to do this evening is would like to talk about a problem that seems to hit our lives every now and then, and it's troubles that we have in our lives. Sometimes these troubles can be very great and trying to us, and it can also be said, kind of alluding that it's like walking the dark valleys. Um, so the lesson I'd like to have this evening is to be that of an encouragement with those who deal with problems and issues in their Christian lives, whether it be public or private. At one time or another, we will all have to deal with issues that push us to the edge and try us, that have the present themselves to be the darkest of times. It's not written for just one person or group, but really for everyone. For we all will experience these troublesome times. And really, it's not a matter of if, but when. For we all have a dark valley ahead of us. And we've all experienced them, and we're going to continue to have them as long as we're on this earth. I believe David had said it best in Psalms 23:4 about the terrible trials in life that cause fear and dread. And he says this in the 23rd Psalm: "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." As a matter of fact, let's examine that psalm just a little bit more here. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And he's not saying there that he doesn't need him. It's just that with this, the Lord, he has no needs, he has no wants. He takes care of him. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The valley of the shadow of death is, what's the best way to put it, expressive of any danger or cause of fear that may arise to trouble one's life. It calls to mind the dangers that lurk along the paths and is calculated to basically arouse dread. Even if this passage of a dark valley that David used here is figurative, as we study and look at history and geography of Palestine, there is a valley very similar to that. A passage that shepherds used to move their sheep from the lowlands to the highland meadows to graze, and is said to be a very dark and foreboding passage. A place where robbers and thieves could lie in wait and ambush, a site where preying beasts could lurk, waiting to grab your sheep as they're going through and grab them and run them off into some little cavern someplace and never to be seen again. In this verse, we understand the troubles that come into one's life, where a Christian is in the midst of doing good things, raising children, maybe loving their spouse, teaching the word, working with the church, or performing basically good deeds all around him. And then suddenly you look around and realize you have troubles. And sometimes you're in such a valley. It'll happen to us. It could be the loss of a loved one. It could be financial burdens. It could be lots of things, spiritual things that could come across. And you just realize that it's a dark time. It's really a troublesome time. Many have experienced this type of ill. I mean, the Bible's full of these examples in it. The external circumstances under which Moses lived and worked did not make his life easy. He was tasked with the release of God's people from Egypt, teaching them God's rules of worship, leading them to a new land. But there were many obstacles in his path of serving God, and unfortunately, rebellion was one of them. Now, rebellion is a very terrible sin that basically halts God's work and undermines morale. It's very harmful and hurtful. Its root causes sometimes just envy, jealousy, maybe greed or hatred. Moses' life illustrates how one can walk through the dark valleys and still serve God. Randy, anything you want to comment on this?
I was just thinking, Jesus gave this parable about a person was traveling from one city to Jerusalem, and he was beaten up by robbers and left half dead. The story was that a priest or a Levite came by, looked at him, and kept on going. No one did the same thing. Well, a Samaritan, which is the Jews did not get along with, saw the man beaten, laying there. He had passion on him, took him, put him on his own beast. He cleaned his wounds, took him to an inn, and the next day he told the innkeeper, if it costs any more money for him when I come, I'll repay you. It shows that when somebody's in a valley, we can help them in a dark valley. We have the obligation to help them to come out of that if we can.
Absolutely, Randy. You can just you can participate, help in getting them out of that dark valley quite a bit. So, okay. So this evening, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk a little bit about Moses, and talk about his life, or did he really have a life? Was it that terrible? Now, when Moses was about 40 years old, he made a choice to renounce his ties with the Egyptian people and be identified with Israel. Unfortunately, a matter of killing an Egyptian in defense of his brethren will come back to haunt him. The day after the incident, he saw two Israelites fighting and tried to separate them and rebuking the one who was doing the wrong. When the offender replied, "Who made you a prince and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you did the Egyptian?" Read that, Exodus chapter 2 and verse 14. And it was about that time that Moses realized that Pharaoh also knew what had happened and was set about to punish him. And what I understand, punish him with death for the crime that he had committed, and that Moses needed to leave. It was kind of a dark time. I mean, he was under the auspices of Pharaoh, but very high up, was doing quite well, and now all of a sudden, he's doing terrible. So he's kind of hit a low spot in his life right there.
Yeah, well, you can imagine him going through the desert to get to where he was going.
Yes.
And they had to be by himself, alone, traveling. It could be, it was very difficult.
Yes.
Yet he got to where he was going.
Yes. What started as an opportunity to help his people evidently took kind of a darker turn. Looking around, I'm sure he felt the walls closing in around him as he starts to flee the country. 40 years would pass before God would appear, commanding him to deliver his people from Egyptian bondage. An opportunity arises to help his brethren, and off he goes again. But it's that nasty word rebellion will still stand in the way of the work that God gave him to do. And so the first one we want to talk about is the rebellion of Pharaoh. Now, if you've read this before, you understand how stubborn Pharaoh really, really was. But before he meets Pharaoh and deal with this stubborn individual, Moses is in possession of some really good resources. He has a rod that turns into a snake, hand that'll turn leprous, that look like he's, got some special magic, Aaron to help him, and oh yes, the great I Am is with him. with these resources, this should be easy, right?
Well, it wasn't real easy for him, no.
Yeah. But no one is more stubborn in dealing with God's requirements than Pharaoh, as we read in Exodus chapters 5 through 12. Moses made the request to let his people go to Pharaoh 10 times. 10 times he made this. And it took 10 plagues to finally convince Pharaoh to release God's people. And his stubbornness led to the destruction of Pharaoh's land. It led to the destruction of his people, to his power, to the firstborn, and finally himself. That's how bad rebellion really hurt Pharaoh. Each time Pharaoh rebelled and stubbornly refused to heed the demand of God, it simply gave God an opportunity to demonstrate the power with another plague. I'm sure Moses felt when another valley passed, it was some relief. But unfortunately, it's not over, because life's not always that way. And so if you've read it before, you will know. And if you haven't, I encourage you to go to Exodus and read. But we have a problem down the road, and it's Aaron and a golden calf. After leaving Egypt, the Israelites are free and on the road to happy. Well, maybe not. While Moses is on top of Mount Sinai to receive the law by the hand of God, the Israelites, anxious about his return, fearing him dead, turn to the idols of Egypt. Now, it's quite interesting. He was up there for quite a long time and speaking with God and getting the 10 Commandments, and they're thinking, well, we think this guy's dead. We think he's gone. Now, I know they couldn't go back up on the mountain. He wasn't allowed to, but there was no search even attempted to be made. They just said, I think he's dead. Who are we going to find to be our leader now? So in Exodus 32:1, they go to Aaron. This is Aaron. This is Moses' brother that helped him, work with God to help get the release of their brethren. They go to Aaron, and after explaining their concerns, they say, now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled about Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god who will go before us as far as we can go. But as for this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So Aaron, we would hope, had plenty of wisdom, promptly makes a golden calf for them to worship. Oh, did I say wisdom? I guess I did. I guess that's what it was. So we have to ask the question, after seeing all that God had done for him, the miracles, the plagues, everything, being freed, crossing the Red Sea, we have to ask the question, was Aaron's mind on vacation during the Pharisee struggles? Was he not? What was he thinking during the Exodus? When is God even?
I often wonder, the people think that God used for Moses. And they see that he was open, and they walk there, and they see that he completely straight around.
Mm-hmm.
Moses go up to get the law, and they entirely really faith in God, or really puzzled by their actions. And Aaron, I think he wasn't real brave.
Yes. It is my personal opinion that people have to deny themselves. If they can't deny themselves, they can't go any farther. There's many people in this world that I've talked to about taking on the Christian life, striving to be the best they possibly can be. And when you do follow it according to what God has given you, you read his book and you follow it, your life is going to have problems, but they're not going to be as bad as what you see with other people. You'd hate to see someone's father die because he was drinking and driving, and he was drunk when he did it and took himself out and 3 other people. That's bad. That's a really bad valley you're going through. Now, are we still going to go through our struggles at this point in time? Absolutely. But I think when people, if they try to deny themselves, their life is going to go so much better. And Randy, what do you think? You think that was a problem with them trying, they couldn't deny themselves?
I'm convinced when people don't read the Bible enough and they start thinking about their roles and all they have, if they don't watch, they're going to drift away from God. We constantly need to understand what God's will is and refresh our mind daily. Just like the Lord's Supper. Once a week, Jesus wants us to remember what he did for us.
Yes.
Man has a tendency to forget when he put himself before others.
Yes, yes. Absolutely. Okay, so in Exodus 32:5, Aaron proclaims the day of feasting, and they all worship the golden idol that he made and indulged in reveling and song, praising the image for their deliverance from bondage. Whoa, boy, do they have short memories here. Is this peer pressure placed upon Aaron? What are they practicing here? Reveling? I believe that's not a very good word if you think about it. I think I had a definition of it a few years back, and if I remember it right, it's not good. There's some pretty strange play going on there. So these people just went from being godly to doing bad things the way the world was. And you know what? Aaron knows better. He really does. So on top of the mountain, God tells Moses of the problem, and he comes down from the mount to correct. Harsh judgment is delivered. Many die. But for Moses, it's another dark valley. But there's even more to come. Even when I got into this and studied it, I was surprised the amount of rebellions that Moses had to endure. And don't you think, Randy, it's really tough to turn around and see some of your brethren who have rebelled and end up losing their lives because of this?
It's amazing that they can just forget everything. What they did was have one big wild party. And what got me was when Moses did confront Aaron, and Aaron said, "Well, I threw gold in and just popped off the
Yeah.
We need to realize if we're not careful, we can make the same kind of mistakes.
Yeah. That is true. There's not much difference between them and us. We're just living in a different age under a different dispensation. And I have to laugh at that one about you brought up about Aaron, because I've heard people give some strange reasons for why they were doing some of the stuff they were doing. And you just look at them going, can't you come up with a better excuse than that one? Because they didn't have one. That's just how life is sometimes. So I don't know. Okay, so it doesn't stop there, it continues on. For now we have the rebellion of Miriam and Aaron. And if you remember who they are, Miriam was the sister, and obviously Aaron was his brother. So brother and sister. So in Numbers 12 and verse 1, we read that Moses married a Cushite woman. Now, evidently, what I understand about this is this kind of caused a little bit of controversy and friction. But Miriam and Aaron later became jealous of this, and Moses' position over Israel and said, comes from Numbers 12 and verse 2, has the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? In other words, are you that privileged, Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? Excuse me, I've got people wanting to call me all the time. There we go. Yeah, turn my volume down here real quick. Hold on just a second, folks. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. And this is interesting, for the text also adds, and the Lord heard it. To confirm that this complaint was totally unjustified, Numbers 12:3 adds, now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. And the Lord calls Moses and Aaron and Miriam together into the tent of meeting. And here the Lord vindicated Moses and approved his conduct, but he disapproved that of Miriam and Aaron. And in Numbers 12 and verse 9, it is said that the anger of the Lord is kindled against these two. And when the glory of the Lord departs, behold, Miriam becomes leprous, white as snow. Aaron approached his brother, saying, "O my Lord, I beg you, do not account this sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned." Aaron asked that Miriam not have to carry the burden of this leprosy through the whole remainder of her life. And if you understand something about leprosy, it was back then. It was a nasty thing. You can get antibiotics for a day, and I think 95% of it is curable. But back then it was not, and it was a very nasty disease. Moses intercedes for Miriam, and the Lord determined that Miriam should be unclean for at least 7 days, at the end of which she would be cleansed from her leprosy. Now, if I understand Moses, I believe that he was even upset about this and what had happened, and obviously joyfully jumped in to be able to help, be able to keep punishment away from Miriam and Aaron. But for him, it's another valley. It's another dark valley. But wait, it gets even darker. For now we have the rebellion of Korah. And in Numbers 16, 1 through 2 reads, "Now Korah, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Peloth, sons of Reuben, took action, and they rose up before Moses together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown." Now, folks, these aren't the common folk. These are not the commoners. These are leaders. And to put this short and simple, Korah basically thought Moses and Aaron had too much authority, and that he was going to remedy this by making priests of the common people. Verse 10. After all, were not all God's people holy? But instead of getting the priesthood, there swallows Korah with his fellow conspirators, Dathan and Abiram. And fire from above destroyed the 250 followers, and a plague killed 14,700 others who demonstrated against Moses and Aaron. Now, we can read through this, and we can see that, well, this is pretty nasty, but do we really truly realize how terrible this was? These were people that came out just directly to God and rebelled and said, "We're not going to follow you." They have seen him bring them. God has directed them from the land to bring them all this far, and he's fed them and taken care of them. He's kept them safe, seen their release from being slaves in Egypt, and they go against him. What's your thought on this, Randy?
It's unbelievable how some people that are leaders want to take over the whole thing and be number one. Now, it puzzles me after they've seen what God's done for them, the power that he has, that they think they can tell him what they're going to do. They weren't thinking rationally.
I think so too. And you know, there's not much of a difference between someone who is a leader and a follower. Even leaders end up making mistakes. Even people who have great abilities, great degrees, great education. It's the heart. It's really the heart determines what a person's really like.
Well, we're told this about God and Jesus: if you love them, you keep their commandments.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't keep their commandments, what does that tell you?
Yeah, you have a problem. You have a problem. Yeah. And so, this is a terrible thing, this rebellion and the punishment that pursued after it. I would have thought that maybe the 14,700 others would have looked at the punishment that was pronounced and would have said, "I think I'm going back to my tent. I'm going to keep my mouth shut." But that didn't quite work. It went on. So Korah, Dathan, Abiram did not dream, perhaps, that their murmur against Moses was actually against the Lord. And to see this rebellion and the punishment had to add another dark time to Moses's life. When you're a leader, you take this seriously about the people that you're leading. You want them to be protected. And it would hurt your heart. It would hurt mine if I was trying to lead somebody and give them my all, give them my best, and they wanted to rebel, especially when the evidence of the commands of God was right there. He commanded them and what they had to do. But can we say that this rebellion was the worst? The rebellion of Korah was pretty bad, but I think this next one that comes up might be considered almost just as bad if you think about it. And that's the rebellion of Moses at the rock. Now this time Moses has another rebellion to deal with. And some people might say it might be the darkest time for Moses. You can decide that. As you may recall, in Numbers 20 and verse 1, the children of Israel were in the desert of Zin at this time. And because they had no water, they began to complain to Moses in verses 2 through 5 about the bad treatment they were getting. Moses and Aaron took the matter before God, who gave them very specific instructions on how to bring forth water from the rock, verses 7 through 9. And instead of speaking to the rock as God had commanded him, Moses struck the rock twice, verse 11. Moses this time is the problem, and it's not others. As a result of this action, God forbade Moses and Aaron from leading the children of Israel into the promised land. Now, we don't have time this evening to sit there and talk about what really transpired, to examine it and break it down. But to my understanding, I believe it was pride. And that's what he had done. And he was not listening, even the smallest degree. God was very concerned about it. This time, Moses is involved, and the valley is even darker for him. You know, it's one thing when other people sin. It's heartbreaking, but when you're the one doing it, when you're the one causing it, you have to get pretty upset with yourself. If you really care about doing the right thing, you have to get pretty upset. And that can be it. I think all of us can turn around and say, I made a decision and I wish I hadn't. I've got a few of those, and they'll probably go in chapter 13 of my life, my life's dumb stuff. And we do that, and we regret we'd said or done something we had done. Because after 40 years and all they'd been through, and being so close to crossing into Canaan, Moses and Aaron cannot cross in. They cannot enter the land because of their sin. But so are the valleys we have to walk. Sometimes because of the decisions that we make, we're prohibited from going forth. So, any comments or questions, Randy?
Yeah, I have this here. I remember Moses throughout his whole period with the people in the wilderness. They constantly tested his patience. He was the meekest man on earth at that time. And I realized what Moses did was wrong. But in a way, I can understand how he was so frustrated, so angry with what the people are constantly doing to him. It doesn't, I know that Moses evidently is right with God, because when Jesus was on the transfiguration, he talked to Moses, and Moses and Elijah was talking to him. But because that's another thing we can take. Moses made a bad mistake there. But we can repent of our sins and be made right with God again. So we can never forget that. We never should get to the point where, I can't be forgiven. That's not the truth. If you repent of your sins, you can be forgiven and made right with God.
There's some pretty terrible things out there that people have done in this world, and we just have to realize that we can't be goofy about our lives. We have to. In other words, when you're in the bottom of a well, don't pick up a shovel and start digging deeper. It's not the way to do it. You can't do that stuff. It's pretty bad. So anyways, let's change some gears here. Let's examine others with dark valleys to walk. And the next person I chose was I had to think about it for a little bit, but I think I chose pretty well. And that is of Ruth. Now, if you've read the book of Ruth, you'll realize as you read in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 1 that it came about in the days when the judges governed that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the land of Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. So during the time of the judges, a man from Bethlehem named Elimelech was forced by a famine to leave his hometown in search of food. With his wife, Naomi, and their sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they moved to the country Moab. And during this time, Elimelech dies and leaves Naomi a widow. Her 2 sons eventually marry non-Israelite women, contrary to the law of Moses, named Orpah and Ruth. And sometimes later, her sons die as well. Now here's the dark side. Famine, left their home for a different country, husband dies, sons die, tasked with the support of 2 daughter-in-laws, left alone with no means of support in a foreign country. Now, you know what that equates to? That's one large dark valley, folks. That is really tough. And I'm trying to think if my life has ever been that tough, and it has not. This is a tough one. There's not a whole lot of resources she's got in this particular one. Now, with Moses, all his valleys were spread out, so to speak. And Ruth, they mostly come at once. So Naomi is resolved to return to Bethlehem with her 2 daughter-in-laws, or when her 2 daughter-in-laws desire to go with her. She encourages them to stay in Moab where their prospects for marriage were going to be better in Israel. Orpah listens and returns to her people, but Ruth does not. Ruth instead expresses her desire to remain with Naomi. From Ruth chapter 1, verses 16 through 17, she says, "Do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. And where you die, I'm going to die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything, but death parts you and me." Talk about a relationship. Don't you agree, Randy?
It was fantastic. That I don't know actually all what happened, but she really does love Naomi.
Yes.
And she was willing to become, she wanted to worship the same God that Naomi worshipped.
Yes.
So that was a good point there. And that probably made everything a whole lot easier for her when they went back to Israel.
Yes, yes. So Ruth's resolve to follow Naomi back to Bethlehem makes it clear that God played an important part in their relationship. I mean, to have that close relationship, obviously, the other daughter-in-law left and decided to go back, but she wanted to be with her. The relationship between Naomi and Ruth was strong, and I do believe the scriptures show that it was because of God was part of that, causing that to be that way. This can be seen in Naomi's prayer for her 2 daughter-in-laws in Ruth chapter 1, 8, and 9. And such faith on part of this godly woman and her genuine concern shown in prayer to God, I think had a positive influence. And one of the things I'd like to say this evening is never, ever underestimate your influence. Everybody out there, I want them to feel that they're probably one of the most important people in this world. And you should think that because of all the people that you have to influence, not because you probably have money or you're the prettiest thing that ever, or most handsome thing that walked around, or you're the smartest thing. It's because when you care for people and you want the best for them, you have this influence for people for good. And I think that's what happened here. But while their devotion to one another and to God is deep, they're still experiencing a mighty tough road. they're in a foreign country. Their husbands are dead. No offspring or relatives to help in their times of trouble. I don't read of any relatives offering assistance from Ruth's, from Ruth's side. I don't read anything like that. It's kind of like, well, that's tough luck. They're on their own. Nobody else is happening from that side of the family, from Ruth's side. Life's just kind of gotten tough, and we can sit back and think positively about this situation because, well, if you've read it, you already know what the answer is going to be, what the story's going to be. But when people go through these trying times of life, it must seem like a dark valley is never going to end. Also, there was a time when spirituality was very low here, and every man, according to Judges 21:25, we read, he did what he thought was right, not what God thought was right, what he thought was right. So I want you to think about it for a second. Have any of you had to go through some tough times in your life? I can think of one that I went through. My wife and I, let me hide my gray mustache here, my gray hair. A long time ago, got married. We had our first son. Named him after me, James Jr. 6 weeks of old, went to the doctor and found he had heart problems. At 6 months of age, he went in for open heart surgery. And I'm telling you what, it'll put you in tears when you watch your child setting up on a gurney going to have open heart surgery and he's trying to wave at you. You can go through some tough times, so I kind of understand to a certain degree. After arriving in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest, Ruth takes on the responsibility of providing for Naomi, her mother-in-law, and herself, and immediately goes into the fields and starts gleaning with the other poor folks. See, that's something they were supposed to do. They were supposed to leave some of the stuff that falls on the ground, and so that the poor people would be able to get it. It's gleaning. It's just picking up the remaining. She may be walking a dark valley, but one thing you can say about Ruth is she's not laying down to die. She's not stopping. She just continues on. She's encouragement to her mother-in-law. She wants to follow God. She's helping. She's doing everything she possibly can. She's not stopping. And in Ruth 2, chapter 2 and verse 3 shows the providence of God, for Ruth starts gleaning in the field of a man named Boaz, who is a kinsman to Elimelech. I also believe God's providence is shown in Ruth chapter 2 and verse 8 when Boaz directs her to glean in his field only and not to go anywhere else. And of course, in the course of time, she appealed to Boaz to perform the obligation of a near kinsman and redeem her to raise up seed for her dead husband. In other words, if you have a husband that dies, a close relative can come in and have relations with you, and you can have children for them. And that was a big deal back then because they needed young folk to be able to take care of them when they got older and to continue the lineage. Again, the hand of God is seen in Boaz taking Ruth as his wife. And she gives birth to a son named Obed. Now, this should put tears in your eyes. He's the father of Jesse, who's the father of King David. Now, one might say her dark valley was short-lived and she made it out in one piece. But please remember, she did not know the future. And we will see that she relied upon God to help her through the dark valleys. One of these days, we're going to have we always have our small dark valleys, but we might have a real big one that's really, really tough. And who are we going to get help from? Prayer, I believe, is one of the strongest tools that we've got. One of the strongest tools. Don't you agree, Randy?
Yes. When we need help, God is always there. He knows what we need. Mm-hmm. He wants us to communicate to him. And he will help us through the dark valleys and bring us out into the light.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. She relied upon God, and God got her through it. Ruth's trust with God and was with God, and she made her decision to turn away from her own people and their gods to be associated with the people of God. Now, I think some people might say, well, that's kind of a hard one because I was raised that way, and that's really what I want to follow. But if you see the way God operates, and you see the way that other gods of this world operate, I think this decision should be pretty simple. You want to follow the true and living God because he's going to help you through all these difficult times. And also remember this, Ruth's prospects for immediate security were really much better back in Moab than in Israel. In Moab, she was among her own people. In Israel, Ruth was a foreign woman, unlikely to even remarry. She must have seen this as a possible obstacle to fulfilling life. But this should also put some tears in our eyes too. She chose God's way instead. She chose that way. We're saying, I'm going to put my life in his hands and let him help us through these difficult times. Ruth's desire to be with God's people, I believe, was an act of faith. Orpah went back to her people and unto her gods, chapter 1 and verse 14. But Ruth said to Naomi, thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. She trusted in the Lord and the things he provides and was content with such provisions. She joined the other poor in gleaning the fields, collecting those little things that fall on the ground, the seeds that fall on the ground, to provide for themselves, even as the law of Moses had demanded. In other words, she was trying to keep his laws. I don't remember this, and somebody help me if I'm wrong. No complaint was ever associated with Ruth, and she worked hard to provide for her mother-in-law and herself. She was a woman who won the respect of the community to her devotion to Naomi, her hard work, and her virtuous conduct. She didn't go around saying, you guys are just nasty Israelite people, and come back. You see how it's done over. She didn't do that kind of stuff. She was just just tried to be a righteous person. When she labored in the field, the workers noticed how hard she worked, saying, and this is chapter 2 and verse 7, she has continued even from the morning until now, and she has been setting a little in the house for only just a little while. In other words, she's been working more than she's been sitting. And when they've seen her, she was sitting down and probably in the shade having a rest. And even Boaz says in chapter 2 and verse 11, all that you have done for your mother-in-law and after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me, and how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. And Boaz sees Ruth's heart and commented, may the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. He understood that she put herself in the care of God. She did not lay down and die. She worked, showed respect and honor to all, to God. So I'd like to offer a conclusion at this point in time, and we'll get Randy's thoughts on this too, because he's always got a lot of good ones. First thing I'd like to say is remember that dark valleys come, and also understand that they pass. They come and they pass. Moses had his challenges and his sins, but he still trusted God to help him through. And for his faith, God gives him rest. And as the author of Hebrews mentions in the book of Hebrews, in the Hebrews Hall of Faith, he mentions him very, very great. Hebrews 11:23 through 29. Man, I'd love to have my name put in that Hebrews book, the Hall of Faith. Ruth passed down to her children an honorable name, a name still given to young ladies today. Well, Ruth's maybe not as popular, but it was when I was younger, and I think it's still heard a couple Ruths out there. She received a reward of righteousness, a son named Obed. She was the great-grandmother to King David and an ancestor to Jesus the Christ. Remember, Jesus came in that lineage. Go to Matthew chapter 1 and start reading that. Her name was included among the 42 men who are given in Jesus' genealogy, Matthew 1 and verse 5. Much proof that trust and obedience in God does pay big rewards. What's your thoughts, Randy?
I believe Ruth's lives demonstrate that she really believed in God. She trusted in him. And as you said, through her lineage, or through Boaz's lineage, her sons, that Christ came. God used her. He knew she was a virtuous woman. And now, you don't have any other woman in the form of becoming a part of a nation and in their lineage, being the lineage of Christ. She was a virtuous woman. She was a woman of great character. She was godly. You know a lot of nice things about her. She was a virtuous woman. Her life demonstrated her faith in God and her love for Naomi. And I think her love for Israel actually got to know.
Yes, yes. It's beautiful to be able to sit there and examine chapters and books of the Bible, not just to read over them, but to really study them and examine them. They're nice. Look at the hidden portions of the scriptures that maybe we don't see all the time. I can't say hidden, but when you deeply study them and just to understand them, like Ruth, look at all that she did to want to serve God and do the right things and the reward she got out of it. There's a reward waiting for us when we do the right thing. So let's think about our lives for a moment. Do they seem unfulfilling? Going nowhere? Maybe you're even walking in a dark valley right now with no light at the end of the tunnel. At least you don't think there is. But remember Ruth, a woman who had faith in God after she lost her husband and had the responsibility of tending her mother-in-law, moving to a foreign land, working among people she did not know. Remember Moses, who, while working for God, had one dark time after another. Oh, he had so many. Remember how God's hand was upon them and their successes. We may have to go through some tough times, maybe wallowing up the mud up to our necks. It just seems like everything's just dark and nasty and muddy, but God's going to help us get through them. Remember that our lives will turn out much differently if we trust the true and living God. That no matter how dark the valley, He's going to illuminate a path that will lead us to the other side. Any finals, Randy?
Well, we know no matter how bad our lives get, if we trust in God, and it's not always easy, we need to take Him at His word. If you love God, you obey Him. That's one of my lessons. Faith is dead unless you obey. Moses obeyed God. Abraham obeyed God. Faithful men, Ruth obeyed God. We have the chance to be what God wants us to be. And we're going to be tested and tried. But look at Abraham when he was told to offer his only begotten son, the son of his love. The very next day, God told him, I want you to offer your son as a living sacrifice. The very next day, he got his men, took his son, the wood and the fire, and he was willing to offer his son. And when he was about ready to do that, an angel of the Lord said, Abraham, Abraham. And he stopped him. Abraham proved to be faithful to God. There may be times that we'll be tested, and we surely want to prove to be faithful.
Absolutely. And so what I'd like to do is sit there and ask where everybody's at with their lives nowadays. We can go on the internet, we can read about all the teachings about how one can become a Christian in this life. The one thing that I'd encourage anybody who's listening to this, go to the Bible. Follow what it has to say. It all has to pull together. We can't take the cafeteria setting when we want to come in, or the cafeteria idea of when we want to become a Christian. It's all right to go to a cafeteria and grab your little tray, and you load the tray with I want this drink and I want this salad and lots of dessert. Yeah, no, I don't want the rest of that other stuff. The Bible gives it all, and we have to follow it all. And we read that those who hear His word believe it. And once believe, they realize that they're doing some wrong things, they repent. And repentance basically means that if you're walking down a specific road and you realize you're walking the wrong one or the wrong way, you turn and you start going the other way, the way God had intended for you. In other words, it changes your life. That those who confess Christ, and this is the one that people are going to want to argue with an awful lot, but it's in there, they become baptized. That finalizes that you can have your sins washed away. 8 divine examples in the book of Acts, and they all list baptism. And there's many more scriptures that talk about that there. So I'm not going to go much farther into that at this point in time. But if you want to get your life right, you want to do the right things and have the blessings, you got to follow what God has to say. So any finals, Randy, before we call this quits?
Well, I just like to let everybody know that if they would like to know what to be saved, they can let us know, and we'll be glad to teach them the truth.
Absolutely. So, okie dokie. Well, with that being said, I suppose, there we go. Put us all on here together. You allowing me the time to come in here and talk an awful lot. I do appreciate it. And I just got to let you know that this lesson is just really gets me to the heart, because I see that there's dark valleys, and I see that there's a cure we can get through them because God's there to help. So we thank you very much for your participation. If you listening, if you feel that you have some questions, please bring them to us, and we'll get you the answers to them. You guys have a wonderful day.